Tonight we have with us Ronald There you are. Friedman, F-R-I-E-D-M-A-N. His topic is reflections on being a Jewish Christian. Tell us something of the problems of being both Jewish and Christian, and how the views in Judaism have evolved, and for that matter in Christianity, on being both Jewish and Christian. So, without further ado, our speaker.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to address a topic that is very close, near and dear to my heart. It has been since the age of 24 and a half when I actually accepted Jesus as my personal Savior. But let me ask you a question. When you look in the mirror, do you see yourself the way others see you?
You don't know how others feel.
How they see you, visually. Your first instinct is to say, yes, of course, that's what a mirror's purpose is, to show you how you look. But you don't actually see yourself in that mirror the same exact way that others see you, because the mirror is a reflection. It's reversed. It's reversed. In order to see yourself in a mirror, the way you're seeing me right now, I would need to design a mirror that reflects the reflection, and that would be the true image. It would be a kind of like a rectangular type of mirror. So, technically, when we look in a mirror, we see enough of who we are, of what we look like, to get out the door. We can tell if we have a little spinach in our teeth, or if our hair is tousled the way we don't like it to be. We fix our clothes, and so we look appropriate. That's the mirror's main purpose. But it's not 100% true reflection of how others see us. Now, as a Jewish Christian, others might see me as someone who isn't fully one or the other. A question I get a lot of times is, wait a second, you're a Jewish Christian, how does that work? Kind of like...
Who is asking you? The Christians are asking you, or the Jews are asking you?
Sometimes people of both. Sometimes Jews ask me. Sometimes Jewish people who are very traditional in the Jewish religion, they'll be even perhaps more biased in their view and consider me no longer Jewish. You can't be Jewish if you believe in Jesus.
Yes.
That's a common comment from some Jews.
Of course.
Some non-Jews will say, well, now that you're Christian, how can you still be Jewish? You have to just be Christian now. That's just as limiting and rude, because that's not the true reflection of my identity, or any identity as a person who's Jewish and accepts Jesus. So let me explain a little to help you understand without talking about the mirror as our metaphor. If right now we were transformed back into the year that Jesus came on the scene in Jerusalem, it's a Roman-occupied, very heavily Jewish population. We're talking about Jerusalem. Many Greeks, many other, very diverse community, much like a big city, because Rome was a conquering power, obviously. They went into different areas and would bring back people from those different areas. So it was a very diverse population. But the Jews were very much of their own group. That's how they maintained their cultural identity, their religious integrity, and of course there was a lot of responsibility to uphold the Jewish faith because of the temple and all of the different sacrifices. But back then, if we were in the streets and we see this guy, this Jewish guy, as my introducer mentioned from Galilee, he would, we would notice, like, yeah, maybe he has different little dialect or accent, but it would still be easily identifiable as a Jew. And then, if we were all Jews, and we heard people talking, oh, he's the Messiah. He's the one that the Bible talked about. As Jews, we would understand who the Messiah was. We might not think he's the one. What? He's the Messiah? But we would understand the idea of Messiah, or in Hebrew, Mashiach.
That's right.
Because the Messiah was a Jewish concept. It was a biblical principle from the Tanakh, the writings of the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, and the prophets. So what happened over time, just to cut to the chase, is that so many non-Jews began to accept the messiahship of Jesus, of this Jewish Messiah, that they basically overpopulated the movement, the group. And those in charge were no longer Jews anymore. They were Gentiles, non-Jews. And they even brought in some teachings that put the Jews down, ironically. They're worshiping a Jewish Messiah, but they're demeaning the leadership role of other Jews who accepted that Jesus was the Messiah. And that happened by about the 3rd century, about 300, 325 or so AD. The structure, the political and power structure of this group had become more Gentile, non-Jewish. And then you go hundreds and hundreds of years, so from 300 or so AD to the present day, you can see where the distortion happened. The mirror flipped. Now, instead of being the most normal thing for a Jewish person to believe in the Messiah, now it has become the most abnormal thing for a Jewish person to accept the, quote, Christian Messiah. But in reality, he was never Christian in the beginning. He was Jewish. Jesus, the Jewish Messiah. The word Christian, though, was applied to the early followers, and that occurred in Antioch. I believe it's the first documented case, as recorded. Antioch was a town, and someone called those who followed Jesus Christian because Christ is just the Greek version, Greek word for Messiah. Messiah comes from the Hebrew language. So if you wanted to maintain that in the Hebrew, it would be like messianist or messianist. That would be the equivalent term of someone following Jesus, the Christ. So the Christ is the Greek for anointed one, same or similar meaning as Messiah.
Your hot tea, sweetie.
Then you can see where Christ and one who followed Christ, or the Christ, was Christian. And that's where the word stuck, Christian. But now when we think of Christian, we don't think or remember or retain that Jewish identity. Right? That's the difficulty here.
You okay, babe?
That's sort of the dilemma of the language, the limitations of language that we find ourselves encountering. Nothing really has changed other than that perception. Much like, if you use a modern example, we all know of the recent passing of Nelson Mandela, a great civic hero, but he was branded a terrorist by those in power, right? Put in jail, never to see the light of day. But then things change, culture changed, principles of honesty and righteousness and justice. And then 27 years later, he walks out of that prison, not a terrorist, a free man, but not just a free man. Within a year or so, he's the new president of the country. So that's another example of how the perception flips. No one would have thought of him as a leader in the power structure of the day when he was in prison. He was a terrorist.
I'll put it over here. That's the only
No
thing
one
I
would
can do.
ever want to see him out of jail. And yet, that's exactly what happened. Because the groundswell of support had changed. So, in the case of Jesus, this Jewish teacher who really didn't have a penny to his name, he was the biggest threat that the Romans in leadership had. But not just the Romans, the Jewish leaders. Jesus was developing a following based on his authentic power, not just some power given by a vote. That was a big difference. The rabbis in power were appointed or elected, and they were in charge of the temple, which involved a lot of money. There was a type of Jewish tax on their own people to support the daily upkeep of the temple. A lot involved, not just furnishings, expensive embellishments, jewelry, fine metals, all that stuff, but all the production, like an agricultural manufacturing combine, the animals that were paraded in and out every day, all year round, to make the sacrificial system work. That was a big part of the temple. Well, Jesus came along and he said some pretty revolutionary things. At one point he even said, this temple will be torn down in 3 days. Not one brick left standing. You can imagine the Jewish leaders hearing that? Now it's affecting my livelihood. If I'm a Jewish leader and I'm making my income and my whole occupation, my whole authenticity as a Jewish leader is revolving around that temple. And then this upstart punk doesn't have a penny to his name, but he's got all these followers, and he's saying stuff like the temple is going to be destroyed? Really? Let's think about that. Well, one thing that we have to keep in mind here is there's, again, that mirror reflection. On an earthly level, we see the machinations of power, the manipulations of people doing dastardly things, including Judas Iscariot, informing the the rabbinic authorities where Jesus was going to be, so they wanted to arrest him without being in front of a lot of people, like kind of on the down low. So what happened is that Jesus, being the God-man, he was just doing God the Father's will. But of course, things happen in the real world. So we have the real world and we have the spiritual world. And Jesus said also, which is words recorded in the New Testament, which in my congregation we call the New Covenant, or even the Newer Covenant, because the Old Testament or the Older Testament is just one half of the newer. But the new does not push away the old. In fact, without the Old Testament, we couldn't really say for sure if Jesus was the Messiah. Why? Why is that? Because the Old Testament contains all of those prophecies, those statements pointing to who the Messiah would be. So the New Testament is an amazing treasure trove of factual information and of the events that occurred that fulfilled the prophecies from the Old Testament. But for anyone to think that the Old Testament is a Jewish book and the New Testament is a Christian book, it just is not logical to think that. It's one seamless book. So getting back to the time of Jesus, all of these things were finally culminating with the appearance of this God-man, Jesus, that was bringing the fulfillment of the prophecies from the Hebrew Scriptures. It was the Jews who understood this the most, and they were the ones who were then explaining to the non-Jews what was going on here. Because people wanted something. They wanted a piece of this Jesus. He was creating miracles all over the place. The rabbis, not so many miracles. They were taking care of the sacrifices, the physical things, collecting the tax for the temple. They were making that kind of Jewish life continue forward. But it's questionable how much real power they were having in the Jewish people's lives. But when Jesus came along, he had the power. So I actually brought a couple samples. The Jews are known as the people of the book. I brought a couple books maybe to give a little example. This is a traditional Bible from the Jewish kid's life. This is one I had as a kid. And it is only the Old Testament because growing up Jewishly today, in a traditional way, we don't learn about Jesus other than maybe from a historical perspective, but not really as a theological narrative. Jesus was is and was and will be the Christian's God, but not the Jewish God or Messiah. So that's how I grew up. But then obviously I became a pretty avid reader from a young age, and as I grew older, I began to question things and learn more that I was not being taught at Hebrew school. There's a very significant...
Did you go to Hebrew school?
Yes, I went to Hebrew school, yes. So
This is the time for questions.
arguments for...
Oh.
There's a very significant passage. I mean, there's so many actually, but I'll read a couple. In Isaiah, one of the major prophets, Isaiah lived roughly 700 years before Jesus came on the earth. And 42, behold my servant whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my spirit upon him. He shall make the right to go forth to the nations. He shall not cry nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the dimly burning wick shall he not quench. He shall make the right to go forth according to the truth. He shall not fail nor be crushed, till he has set the right of the earth, and the isles shall wait for his teaching. Isaiah 53 is another very famous passage that does speak to the idea, the person of the Messiah. It actually begins in chapter 52. I'll start from chapter 52, verse 13. Behold, my servant shall prosper. He shall be exalted and lifted up, and shall be very high. According as many were appalled at thee, so marred was his visage unlike that of a man, and his form unlike that of the sons of men. So shall he startle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which had not been told them shall they see, and that which they had not heard shall they perceive.
Oh, I'm fine.
Who would have believed our report? And to whom hath the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shot up right forth as a sapling, and as a root out of a dry ground. He had no form or beauty that we should look upon him, nor comeliness that we should delight in him. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of pains and acquainted with disease. And as one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely our diseases he did bear, and our pains he carried. Whereas we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded because of our transgressions. He was crushed because of our iniquities. The chastisement of our welfare was upon him, and with his stripes we were healed. All we like sheep did go astray. We turned every one to his own way. And the Lord hath made to light on him the iniquity of us all. So in one short passage in the Jewish scriptures, we see this narrative that began before human history, had a major cataclysmic turn of events when this God-man appeared in the flesh. Who they're talking about here, we can insinuate that, this man of sorrows. He was not Brad Pitt coming onto a Hollywood set. His power, his strength, his charisma did not come from his physical attractiveness, but from the power of God itself coming through him in his words and deeds. And then taking those transgressions upon himself, the sins that he bore for the forgiveness of sin for all who would accept his sacrifice, if it truly is the perfect atoning sacrifice. Then it is a sacrifice, and it is a promise that all Jews should accept. Not just Jews, though. Gentiles as well. So the promise of God came through the Jews. Does not mean you have to be Jewish to accept the promise of God and that redeeming sacrifice of Jesus. But what we see often today in today's churches is almost a denial that Jews even need Jesus, or that Jews even should need Jesus, or that Jews should want to know God in a personal way. And many Gentile churches fail miserably to include Jews in their congregation. But then we have the cultural aspect, and that's why I, as a Jewish Christian,
Some dessert?
do not really feel that comfortable in Gentile churches, because I'm born Jewish, but there's a cultural element of one's religious background, whether you're Greek Orthodox, Italian or Irish Catholic, Vietnamese, Buddhist. There's a religious element, but there's a cultural. So as a Jewish person, I am so grateful that we now have congregations where Jewish Christians can attend, along with Gentile Christians. And here, for example, is a Bible written from a very Jewish perspective, a New Testament Bible called the Jewish New Testament. What I like about this is that some of the key words are written in Yiddish or some Hebrew elements,
Gentlemen?
which most Jews are familiar with. So one example might be reading from Romans chapter 10, verse 4. For the goal at which the Torah aims is the Messiah, who offers righteousness to everyone who trusts. For Moshe writes about the righteousness grounded in the Torah, that the person who does these things will attain life through them. So in just that short passage, you see the use of the word Torah, which is the Hebrew word, and that refers to the writings of the prophets in the Old Testament. You see the word Messiah, whereas in most Bible translations you would see Christ. And the reason why we avoid saying Christ in Messianic congregations is not to deny Jesus, but to allow those who have perhaps suffered at the hands of Gentile discrimination, especially Holocaust survivors, they don't like the term Christ. It smacks of hostility, and that's unfortunate, but that is just the power of certain words, the connotation, the negative connotation. So we try to be a very friendly place for Jews coming to our congregation who may not have accepted Jesus yet, but they're Jewish, and we want them to be familiar with the terms we use. So we'll say Messiah, and here the term Moish, that's Moses, that's Hebrew for Moses. And I think we all know who Moses was, if not from the Bible, from Cecil B. DeMille's great movie, The Ten Commandments. As a Jewish Christian, there's a lot of opportunities to study. I did not attend seminary for a master's degree. I do know many who have. I did go to a Christian seminary for 1 year, but most of my learning has been self-taught and just from sitting at the feet of very educated men and women. One of the books that I find remarkably comprehensive, I've not gone through it entirely, but it was written by a Jewish Christian in the 1800s called The Life and Times of Jesus the Messiah. And you can see it's a thick book, but it's so full of, it's like an encyclopedia. And this was a rabbi who came to faith in Jesus at a time when it was very difficult to do that in Eastern Europe. He was probably shunned by his family and friends, probably was forced to leave his community even, and make his way to the United States. And there were those who supported that notion that Jews could believe in Jesus. And in the late 1800s, there was an organization formed called the American Board of Mission to the Jews, which was later renamed Chosen People Ministries. There's another ministry that was begun in the early 70s by a missionary from the American Board of Mission to the Jews, and his name was Moish Rosen, and he wanted to reach Jewish men and women, younger Jewish men and women, who were basically hippies. They had rejected the values of their parents, and they were living that late 60s, early 70s lifestyle. Live for the day. They were doing drugs, they were having a lot of sex, they weren't always working full-time jobs, they were maybe working, selling drugs and stuff like that. And this guy, Moish Rosen, a mid-40s kind of executive type, he wore a suit and tie, and he would go to the beaches and hang out with these Jewish hippies and tell them about their Jewish Messiah. And over the months that he was doing this, he actually convinced some. Some were persuaded, and they were already so open-minded that nothing was holding them back, this cultural bias against believing in Jesus. So many of them did. And that gave rise to another ministry organization called Jews for Jesus, which, how many have heard of that organization? Right? Pretty popular name. After I became a Jewish Christian and got married, my wife and I were approached by the Jews for Jesus organizer in Chicago to serve with them. And we agreed. For 1 year we served at their headquarters in San Francisco. We were trained to learn a repertoire of about 30 songs and skits. And then we lived on a 40-foot bus with about 6 or 7 other people and traveled all over the country, going to churches, college campuses, Messianic congregations, presenting stories and songs, but also trying to reach Jews with this very approachable news, like it's okay to be Jewish and believe in Jesus. Many of the people we spoke to obviously were not Jews because most Jews would not invite us. So the mindset was to visit the Gentile churches and have them help us do our work. So you have neighbors, you have friends that are Jewish, they might be interested. Maybe if you're a Gentile, you don't really know the whole Jewish cultural background of the Bible from a Jewish perspective. But you know what? If someone you know is interested, they're Jewish, send them our way. So that's the mission of Jews for Jesus, Chosen People Ministries, Friends of Israel, and other ministries that have come into existence over the years. Since the 1970s, some estimates have projected the numbers of Jewish Christians at about 300,000 worldwide. Not a huge number, but much larger than any thought it would have been 50 years ago. And now there are Messianic congregations around the world. This is an example of a flyer that I just picked up from my services today. And if you'd like, I could pass that around. The news and schmooze. There's some Hebrew on it. Again, the whole service is organized in a way to reflect back the Jewishness of Christianity, of Jesus. And to make what might seem at first a completely foreign experience for a Jewish person to come to a church, this makes it easier for them to realize, hey, this is a congregation. It's just like the synagogue you went to as a kid in many ways. But we believe in Jesus, and it's okay. It's okay to be Jewish and believe in Jesus. So that's the way we use to show people that you got to look at the mirror with the true reflection. People see you one way, that doesn't really mean that's you, right? Your identity, if you believe in God, is that we're all children of God. So whatever cultural backgrounds we come from, we have to learn about that. We learn by what our parents tell us, what we learn at school. Obviously, Jewish children who have parents that don't believe in Jesus won't learn that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah unless they're told or taught from the Scripture. So now, obviously, we do have many kids growing up in families with parents that love the Lord, accept their Jewish Messiah, and the new generation of the faithful few are increasing. So I suppose now it would be time for some Q&A.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Okay, Bram's going to lead in the questions, and I got the first one if you don't mind.
Okay, sure.
All right.
How does one get to know God?
That's a great question. The question is, how does one get to know God? Paul, the apostle, actually addresses that, I believe, in Romans, and he says something about even if someone was, he doesn't actually say this, but the idea is, even if someone was never taught or introduced to the idea of God. Let's say a person was trapped on an island and grew up apart from anyone else. Just the natural world itself is evidence of a supernatural being. So, I guess to explain that more fully, when we just cry out, when we talk, when we even have a thought or a heartfelt desire to know God, God knows that. And if He is truly in the business of helping us know Him, He's going to help us know Him.
Here you go, young man.
So when I think of prayer, I just think of talking to God, being honest. And I know before I became a Christian, I did pray, and I wanted to know God more. And I did a lot of other things before I got to that point. But I do believe that my initial incipient desire to know God
No.
was evidence that He provided to bring me to Him. Yes, another question
I
from
don't
Beck?
recommend it. You want something sweet, like a little piece of cake?
Okay, next question.
This is a
Yeah,
question.
let me check on the
My
price.
question is
Apple,
this.
cherry, and blueberry.
You are Jewish, but you went to Christianity. I want to know why Judaism wasn't giving you what you needed.
Why not?
Christianity is giving you what you need. Now, we all know that there are Protestants that somewhere in life, somebody left Protestant and went to Catholic. Some people left Christianity and went to Islam. And I want to know, because you seem to saying you leaving because from here, not leaving. You going over here because of Jesus. Most people that go from here to there, in my opinion, and from what I can interpret from what I read or what they said, because the mission of that religion, the theology of that religion, it was clear to them superior to the one that they were in. Now, could you tell me, how, did you go over because this person named Jesus, or the theology of Christians, the history of Christianity, and so forth and so on, was those the motivation for you?
Another great question. It's true, when it comes right down to it, one is inferior to the other. Otherwise, why would I be compelled to go to the other? It's a completion, though. Traditional Judaism is inferior and really irrelevant in some ways because it's clear from the biblical record that Judaism was built on a system of sacrifice. And at some point it was animal sacrifice. That was Judaism. When the temple was destroyed in 70-something AD, for all practical purposes, traditional Judaism was also destroyed. But what happened then, the rabbis redesigned, innovated, and now said, we can have little temples all around the world. That's congregations, synagogues. So now we can have little temples, and instead of sacrificing animals, maybe, like we were doing at the main temple in Jerusalem, we can have maybe a chicken sacrifice on Yom Kippur, and sprinkle the blood on the door and things like that instead of these lambs and bulls and all that. So revisions were made to God's practice. But Jesus addressed that. He said that He was the Lamb of God, and that when He was sacrificed, it was once for all. If He was the perfect, morally perfect, the moral perfect Lamb of God, unblemished, and He was sacrificed, which He was, and striped, and rose from the dead, then those animal sacrifices were no longer valid. And it wasn't enough. How many animals would you sacrifice to take moral sin away? You can't sacrifice enough animals. But God, at one point, said you could. But it was only until Jesus came as the Lamb of God. And then to your other point about the differentiations within the Christian world, that's a much broader subject, and that has more to do with some of the particulars. The main ideology or theology is the same. It's just liturgical. Like some churches have music that people don't appeal to, so they'll go to another church. It doesn't mean they don't believe in Jesus anymore. It just means there's different styles that they like. Just like you and I might not go to the same store to buy clothes because we just have different styles. It doesn't mean we don't believe in clothes. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, good job.
Thank you.
Okay, over
Let's
here.
see, David Travis and Mo Sheffield.
Saying Jews for Jesus, isn't that very much like saying Democrats for Nixon?
Did everyone hear the question?
Yes.
The question was, isn't saying Jews for Jesus very much like saying Democrats for Nixon? And for those of you who don't know, Nixon was a Republican. Well, in some ways, yes, and that's what I was trying to elaborate on, that some people will consider a Jew for Jesus a contradiction in terms. And you can't be two different things at the same time. But what I'm trying to persuade you to see, this different perception, is that for a Jewish person to believe in Jesus is really the most Jewish thing a Jewish person can do. And I say that not from my own opinion, but from the Bible, from the prophetic writings that make it very clear that Jesus was the Messiah promised by Moses and all the other prophets. And Jesus was Jewish. There's only hundreds of years of this changing perception, which has kind of compelled people to think of Jesus in non-Jewish terms, and therefore a Jewish person accepting Jesus being no longer Jewish. But I reject that entirely. Yes, next question.
And over here.
Mo Sheffield?
Yeah, let me just stand up. You mentioned that the earliest recorded use of the word Christian or Christianity that you could find what occurred in Antioch. I have two questions about that. One, what is estimated to be the probable date of that writing? And two, what was the context? Were they saying, were they implying that Christianity was a religion separate from Judaism? Or were they simply saying that Christians were Jews who were following Jesus?
Good question.
Just calling them Christians in the same way that a fairly objective scholar would say not only was Stalin a Marxist, Trotsky was a Marxist too, even though he disagreed with him.
Yeah, exactly. It would be like those who followed Marx calling them Marxists, right? So the first date is 60 AD or so. So about 30 years after Jesus' death and resurrection.
Yeah.
And it was just a term, like you said, to refer to this kind of new group now, because not all Jews follow Jesus, just like not all non-Jews follow Jesus, but those primarily Jews and some Gentiles who began to follow Jesus, they were now called Christians. So it was a unifying term of differences.
Did they use the term, in this quotation from Antioch, number one, did they use the term Christianity or the term Christians? And if they use the term Christians, did they mean a group within Judaism or outside of Judaism?
At that time, there was some confusion by even those of that time what these people were. Are they still Jews? They were going to the synagogue still until they were rejected. Until they really had to leave the synagogue, because at some point when a lot of Jews who accepted Jesus were attending the traditional synagogue or services, the rabbis didn't appreciate the teaching, so they added a benediction, a prayer, a blessing that everyone would say. There are a lot of blessings we say, whether you grow up in the Catholic Church or a Jewish synagogue. So one of the new blessings that they added was really a renunciation or almost like a curse against these Christians. So those Jews who believed in Jesus, they couldn't say that. So then they had to leave the congregation. And that's eventually where you did have the rise of a whole another church structure, which then became very Gentile in nature.
Apparently there were divisions among the synagogues because there were other synagogues which until about 600 AD were centers for teaching about Jesus the Messiah. The synagogues were a principal center for what we would call conversion to Christianity, except they weren't calling it Christianity, they were calling it Judaism.
Okay, I didn't know that. Another question?
I got a question based on, that's okay, I speak loud, you can hold on to your microphone.
No, you need to speak louder.
You need to use the microphone.
I can hear him.
I was former believer, now not atheist, but anti-God. I moved beyond atheist, and the reason is I read the Bible, and it took me 5-6 years because I'm a slow reader. But the thing is, I got 2 questions I'd like to ask our esteemed speaker here because he's more of a scholar than I am. I read a book, The Jewish Mystique, 20-30 years ago, written by, I think it was like a Dutch sounding name, a European author, and he comments that the Jewish people, to be Jewish, you cannot accept Jesus Christ, because Jesus Christ was for accepting the brotherhood of all people, but to be Jewish means to be respectful of the fact that God chose the Jewish people, and that is forbidden to break the exclusive relationship with God. So that is number one. Number two, I have 3 or 4 Bibles, the Greek Bible, which I can read in the modern Greek and the biblical Greek. I also have a Catholic Bible and Protestant Bibles. And one Protestant Bible, its appendix has different dates of history, all the way 5,000 years ago and down to after Jesus Christ. And the thing about Jesus Christ is, this is very strange that, you know, they know when various people were born 400 or 500 years before Christ, but they don't know when Jesus Christ was born. And it says the birth of Jesus Christ is between 1 BC and 4 AD. So if the Son of God came here, I mean, it wasn't on the radio or the newspapers or something, didn't they ring the church bells and say, hey, you know, the Son of God is here? How come we had to learn about it after he was dead?
Thank you for your insights. That points to an issue that a lot of biblical scholars are always looking for, and that's more documentation to support the contention. So right now you're correct. Scholars cannot say with exact certainty the date. I've heard the prevailing theory is that Jesus was actually born in the spring, but you know, the documentation in the Bible just talks about the 3 magi following the star to where the baby Jesus was, and then some scholars will say even that, well, he wasn't really a baby, he might have already been a year or 2 old or something. So there's some uncertainty there, but that does not exclude the possibility that documentation will surface, because that happens all the time. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found just about 60 years ago, and that supported a lot of the biblical record. Yes, Jim?
Okay. Can you, I know we've been getting a lot into your views on Jesus and everything, but this question's a little more off the point. Can you give us just a little bit about your personal background and particularly your affiliation with the group that I'm affiliated with called Toastmasters?
Sure. A real nutshell view of my personal journey to Jesus, it started, as I alluded to earlier, I was always an avid reader. I had a very open mind to ideas and stuff growing up. I got really involved in the health foods when I was a teenager. I read a lot of stuff on Gandhi, and Gandhi was an avid vegetarian who also fasted, wrote a book on fasting. In my freshman year of college, I fasted for 1 week. That was somewhat of a physical and spiritual moment for me, because fasting teaches you a lot about what your body and mind are capable of. Jesus also fasted for 40 days, as many of us recall in the biblical narrative. Moses, a lot of famous people through the ages have fasted for many. But anyways, after fasting, I got involved in meditation. I bought into the view of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, an Indian physicist trained scientist who came to America. Some of you may have even remembered, I think he was on the cover of Time magazine. He had a lot of influence with the Beatles, especially John Lennon, in the late 60s, very early 70s. So late 70s, early 80s, I became involved in transcendental meditation, learned their advanced technique, attended the college that Maharishi bought in Iowa, used to be called Parsons College. So for me, that was my spiritual view at the time, until 2 years went by and I just didn't really believe it anymore. Some cracks in the logic, and again, I think God was working on me because I still felt very proud of my Jewish heritage. There were many Jewish people involved in the Transcendental Meditation movement, but I did not see how they really paired up. It was illogical. So I ended up believing that, and it was at that point when I met a friend who gave me a contact at Jews for Jesus, and I began to study the Bible with that person. And over months of studying and seeing for really the first time how the New Testament matched the prophetic passages in the Old Testament, that's when I accepted Jesus as my Messiah. That was in my 20s, as I said. And then Toastmasters, the last few years, I became involved in the International Public Speaking Group, which helps develop confidence speaking. It's a great networking opportunity. There are Toastmaster groups all over the world, actually. And it gives the person opportunities to hear, learn from other people, but then also present your own ideas. And the meetings are usually an hour to 2 hours, no more. So personally, I worked in a corporate environment this last 6.5 years as a writer-editor for a Fortune 100 company, and I've also taught at the high school and college level, English and writing, but I have other hobbies, and the spiritual component of my life is very important to me, and my congregational family is really more my family in many ways than my biological family. I'm the only Jewish Christian in my family, so that's the reason why I think I really appreciate my congregational family. Yes, question back?
Yeah, Ryan, you said the Old Testament matches the New, but isn't it a fact that the New Testament was carefully edited because there were disputes about this individual's divinity? And so they said he had to fulfill prophecy. So to settle the argument, they said, oh, here it is. It was prophesied he'll be 6 feet tall, and if you look in here, he's 6 feet tall. I mean...
Well, can you, I see you're just kind of giving an example off the cuff.
Yeah,
but is there a specific example that you're
there's a
referring to?
classic one is in the birth of Jesus. He's this manipulation to establish the fact that he's in the house of David is probably the most prevalent one. The manipulation of the story, because they said, well, if he's a Messiah, he's got to be of the house of David. And there's disputes. This is the beginning of a new religion here. And they're just like you, trying to persuade the old timers. And so they're raising questions and saying he's got to fulfill these prophecies. Was he born in the house of David? Oh yes. See, according to the, that's why those stories were tacked on. I think it's pretty well accepted that those stories were tacked on to the Gospels, the two versions of the birth of Jesus, to settle arguments and to match the Old Testament requirements. So
There have been many
you're saying
theories.
they match? You're an editor. That's careful editing. It's called continuity.
To a point, I can agree with your statement. There are numerous other assertions made hundreds of years before Jesus appeared that were not edited. They were already there. So the things that he did to support or marry with those, he would have had to edit his own life.
How
in a
many
sense.
versions of his life in their documents are there? One.
The gospel is different.
Well, you have the Book of Levi, which is an apocryphal writing, which does propose what he did during the time that is not recorded in the New Testament. That did not become an accepted part of the canon of the accepted New Testament literature. There have been many theories of things to dispute the traditional line or view. You're right. As far as very specific examples of editing to match the prophecies from the Old Testament, I would need to know which one specifically you're referring to. And also, I want to just say again, if I have, I don't want to mislead anyone, I did not get a master's in divinity. I took 1 year of classes at Trinity Evangelical Divinity Seminary, but by no means am I an expert. Like I said, I've sat at the feet of those who have PhDs and have spent years and years studying. They do know the biblical Greek, Aramaic. A friend of mine, he actually found out he had a love of and knowledge of learning languages after he fell in love with a Russian girl whose English was not great. So he learned Russian, and once he picked up Russian, he had an opportunity to go to seminary, and he learned about 4 other languages. He now knows like 6 biblical languages. He's a world expert in one of the other Semitic languages, and he writes papers in journals and all that. So I know people who have extensive knowledge of biblical languages, of church history, of the Talmudic view of the Jewish religion, all that stuff. I don't have all that. I have little snippets, and that's what I've tried to propose today, an overview, my own reflections with some knowledge, but certainly I don't have a PhD in this subject.
Let's see, Doug,
Yeah, are you a Messianic Jew, and if not, why aren't you considered? I mean, the other thing is, talking about being Christian Jewish, you're in 2 camps. And I don't know if you embrace the Nicene Creed that the church, Catholic Church professes, or why would you be interested in being in both camps?
Well, to answer your question, the first question, yes, I am a Messianic Jew. If I didn't mention that, Messianic Jew is just another way of saying Jewish Christian. You could also use the term Hebrew Christian. Some use that term. Some other terms that I don't favor myself. I know some Gentile churches refer to a Messianic Jew as a completed Jew. I don't really like that term, but Messianic Jew is certainly one that I embrace. And then to answer your other question, the Nicene Creed, I don't know it all by heart. If you know it, if it's short, you want to say what it is, I can tell you if I embrace it or not.
So why did you, well, they say it in Catholic churches that you believe in God, the Father Almighty, you believe in Jesus Christ, you believe in
Holy Spirit,
baptism, the Holy Spirit, life after death. I don't understand, I don't know if you're trying to bring Jewish people to become Christian, convert to Christianity, or what's your...
No, not to convert to Christian. It's really just to embrace Jesus as the Jewish Messiah. That's really the the main discussion point that we're trying to bring. We're not trying to convert anyone, because first of all, people don't convert people. God can convert someone's heart, but that has to come from God.
We have a question over here from Neil Rez.
Accepting Jesus as king is different from converting to Christianity? What
Accepting
is-
Jesus.
Then what in fact is converting to Christianity if that's not it?
Well, again, when we talk about these kinds of very loaded terms, I think we have to provide more detail. So when we say convert, or when you say convert, what are you really saying? What are you describing?
I'm quoting your words back at you and asking for that clarification.
Okay. But I didn't say we're looking for Jews to convert. I didn't say that.
You said convert is different from accepting Jesus Christ as some sort of divine king.
Okay.
And if they're not the same, what is the difference?
Okay, so I think that's a great point. So the difference is, again, it comes back to more of this cultural mindset that in the Middle Ages, for example, if a Jewish person wanted to accept Jesus, they would have to convert. They would have to change their whole life. They would have to leave their Jewishness and Judaism practices behind to become part of the Gentile church, because that's all that was really out there. And that's, of course, assimilation is what they did. So it did happen, but now, today, it's different, because we're not looking for people to convert and leave their Jewishness. We're just looking for Jewish people who want to remain Jewish and accept and be proud of the Jewish identity, to see Jesus as that fulfillment of the Jewish theology, that he is a Jewish Messiah. But you don't have to start doing different things.
But that fulfillment is Christian, it's not Jewish.
That's your opinion. It's not mine.
Okay.
I have a question too, yes. You said that Jesus was executed because he predicted the fall of the temple. Now, hadn't prophets, recognized prophets in Judaism, also predicted the fall of the temple? And hadn't it actually fallen and been destroyed at least once previous, and desecrated otherwise?
Yeah, it was actually when the Maccabees came and got the temple back and cleansed it. It wasn't destroyed; it was defiled. Let's see, you know what?
I think they sacrificed a pig.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I'm not sure which. Right. The main destruction of the temple was at 70 AD, but as far as other prophets having prophesied the destruction of the temple, I think it probably is in the Old Testament. I just don't know where exactly.
Well, in Torah you have the prediction of exile for
Sure.
the people.
Absolutely.
If they disobey.
Right, and that's from God, right? So God already had that mandate that if the people reject are not faithful to the promises, his promises, then yes, they're going to be sent out. And obviously that's what happened when they were out of their land, the whole diaspora. But he never cut them off, and just the fact that the Jewish or the Israelites failed to fulfill their promises never means that God will fail to deliver on his promises. And as far as what you said about the Jesus being executed because of something he said, well, I didn't mean to imply that it was just one thing he said. It was a lot of things he said, but also who he was. And he was a threat to their power structure. So, but again, it's not just them murdering him. This is all God's plan, because Jesus had to die for the sake of everyone's sins and then be resurrected as the only one who ever has come back from the dead and still exist as God the Son.
I think I might argue with that a little bit. For instance, Jesus raises the son of a widow of Nain, and Lazarus, and and the daughter of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue in Capernaum. But it's not said of them that they were raised to the heavens, that they were immortal as we see Jesus, the resurrected one. The point is that simply predicting the Sanhedrin was apparently exceeding its authority to order the execution of Jesus, and the gospel record says that the Romans, Pilate and Herod, neither of them found him to be guilty of anything seditious. Okay.
Yeah, the Sanhedrin was the 70 elders of the Jewish community. Basically, they were the chief rabbis, so you can think of it as a city council in a sense for the Jewish people. In a way, they were rabbis, they were powerful. And yes, they manipulated the law by demanding Jesus to be executed. There was a Roman law that allowed the Roman governor to release someone who was in jail instead of another person. So basically giving someone a break. And he wanted to do that with Jesus because in his investigation, the Roman leaders' investigation, they didn't see Jesus breaking any laws. But the rabbis said, no, he is breaking a Jewish law. But that wasn't a Roman law. So they didn't want to execute him because he didn't really break a capital offense law in the Roman government. But then the people, the Jewish and others, but mostly the rabbis stirring up the people, demanded that Jesus be executed and instead release Barabbas, who was another Jewish person that was in prison or in jail by the Romans. And he was actually an insurrectionist. So they saw him as someone they wanted back in the community instead of Jesus, so they demanded Jesus to be executed, and Barabbas was released. So yes, you're right about that.
And also there were, well, it's another question really, but there were several Jewish quote messiahs in the first century.
Yes,
beginning around 6 AD, who raised armies against the Roman authorities. So being messianic might mean something quite different than supporting Jesus, who didn't raise an army.
Yeah, that's another point. Historically, we do know that there were other false messiahs or others who claimed to be Messiah, and they did raise, like Bar Kokhba had a revolt against the Roman authority. Second century, right. So there were other armies, and of course when Jesus came, I couldn't explain everything I want to, but that does bring up another issue, that at that time, even those who were following Jesus were so dumbfounded that he was crucified because they expected him to be the one who would overthrow the Roman rule. over that area, over Jerusalem in that area. And then when that didn't happen, they became targets as well. Obviously, the apostles, many of them were executed later too.
So it could be very, much resented by some Jews of being accused of being messianic themselves, because they might be associated with the revolt against Roman authority or the Jewish leadership.
Well, one thing that Jesus did tell his followers before his death was, because they asked him how would they know when the time would come, like when the Romans would be overthrown. And basically Jesus told them, when you see the city encircled by the Roman soldiers, that's when you need to leave. And that's exactly what happened. Because then the Romans did destroy Jerusalem. Yes, question in the back?
No, I think it's about,
Okay, no more second questions?
we should be getting
Rob?
rebuttals soon.
Well, he's calling on me. Why all right, Ron. You said you you guys had a little discussion here about you knew God, and I didn't really understand what all that meant. But I was reasoning here, you were just discussing, well, you know Christ rose from the dead. But when this thing you say, well, he rose from the dead, it's like, did you do the same thing, say, well, Jesus rose from the dead, his presence is in this room. I mean, you didn't have very strong criteria for knowing God. Do you have equally absence of criteria, or did they, to verify the resurrection?
Well, it was eyewitnessed by 5,000 people. That's written in the New Testament record.
Is it written anywhere else?
I believe
That 5,000 people saw this?
after his resurrection, yes. That he returned and spent some time, I think it was.
I'll save you some time, there's not written anywhere else.
I would have to probably look to, who was that, first
One of the
century?
questions is, why isn't it recorded
Josephus
anywhere?
was.
No, it's not recorded anywhere. Josephus is.
Yeah, it may not be. I don't know. That's a great question. But the New Testament does stand as a.
I mean, if the
supporting
Romans
document.
executed somebody and he came back, wouldn't that be noted
It was.
by the Romans?
Well, I'm not sure the Romans would want to note that. What would be the incentive for them to do that?
What would be the incentive of Christians to change the story? And why do you think the New Testament is a historical document?
Why do you think it's not?
Because we know how it was written. And who
How was it written?
By people promoting a religion.
Yeah.
Same as the Old Testament.
Well,
And don't you see theological differences between these two religions?
which ones are you thinking of?
The virgin birth, the resurrection, I could think of a dozen of them.
Well, where in the Old Testament does it say that there can be no virgin birth?
Where in the Old Testament
You've got
does it
that
say that it
backwards.
can?
The fact that it says, it doesn't say that it can't, doesn't
So then they
mean-
don't conflict.
Sure they do.
Why?
Oh,
If there's no prohibition against it, you're saying that the New Testament contradicts the Old
You're
Testament.
trying to prove a negative.
No, you're trying to make an assumption that isn't there.
There's all kinds of contradictions between these two religions.
Well, give me one, that's what I'm asking you. The one you just cited wasn't really a contradiction.
All right.
God's incarnation
Guys,
totally contradicts anything, anywhere in the Old Testament.
That,
What verses?
Jesus never talked about the Ten Commandments.
your only argument is that Jesus was Jewish, and we know that. But that doesn't mean that these two religions are compatible with each other.
I was wondering why it's not compatible with
Okay.
Muslims. That's the other religion of the book.
It's an Abrahamic religion.
Yeah.
It's about 8:20, Brom. We're gonna have to get the rebuttals real quick.
I'm serious about that.
They should.
All right, let's take this guy's. He hasn't had one. We'll take this as the last question.
I got an easy question. I got an easy question. Not so difficult. Since I never met a person before who believes in, who is Jew and who is a Christian, and you are one. Are you a good? Two questions I ask you, then answer. Are you a good Samaritan? One. Good Samaritan.
Oh, a good Samaritan?
Right. Okay, that's one.
What's the question though?
It is, are you one in your practical life because you are white in a two religion. And second thing, what is the last time you helped your oldest relative from your compassion?
Say that again.
Last time you helped your oldest relative.
Last part, help what?
Oldest relative.
A relative? Help a relative?
Yeah.
Help a relative?
Yeah, last time you helped.
Okay, I'll get them. Okay.
Thank you, Renata.
Okay, the question was, do I see myself as a good Samaritan? Am I a good Samaritan? All right, well then, I probably need some backstory for those unfamiliar with the biblical record. The Samaritans were despised by the Jewish people because they were basically, in a sense, a mixed breed, okay? They were mixed race, they had intermarried with the Samaritans.
You know I didn't mean in that sense.
No, I'm trying to explain because people probably don't understand what Samaritan is.
I mean on your goodness.
We all know. We all know.
I mean on your goodness.
Let me answer.
Right, but the story is that.
You can ask the question, but he gets to do the response.
Right.
So the story was, and Jesus referenced this because he was asking his disciples and others, who is the good person here, basically. A person was left on the side of the road, bleeding from a wound after being robbed, and the rabbi or some obviously Jewish person walked by. And the Jewish priest, okay. Okay, a Levite, thank you for filling that in. So obviously a very, in a sense, noble Jewish and respected Jewish person in the community, but he walked on. It was a Samaritan who came, one of these despised people, who picked up the person, brought him to an inn, paid for a week to take care of him, and he checked on him on his way back from the business trip that he was on, whatever. So Jesus was saying basically, well, who's good? Well, obviously it's the Samaritan, the person who was seen as despised in the eyes of the, quote, righteous, but it was really the Samaritan who was much more righteous. So do I see myself as a good Samaritan? I think I do, because I don't feel I'm superior than anyone. If I saw someone on the side of a road, I would certainly do what I could to help them, and when I've had opportunities to help people in other ways. I mean, I don't have a ton of money, but I help in other ways. I mean, I try to help people with advice, like family, my nephew, he didn't go to college, and I actually just helped him get a job this past week, so I feel real good about that. Things like that, but I'm not saying I'm such a great person. I mean, I haven't gone overseas to feed the hungry, but I have participated in volunteer activities with a ministry called Feed My Starving People, which is a very great organization. It's a Christian organization, and they have facilities where you can go and just spend some time and fill these packets of high-protein food that they ship out. So it's an easy way to serve, but I try to do things like that.
That's nice. All right, you guys want to go to rebuttals?
Yeah, let's go to rebuttals.
All right, let's sing.
You'll get the last word at the end of the night.
Why not?
Yeah, you'll get the last word. What's going to happen now is the audience is going to go up and each get a few minutes to say their piece.
Yeah, I would like to know how many people have some remarks to make, whether they're on this subject or not. Let's see. One,
These guys are friends of the devil.
4, 5, 6, 7.
I think I understand.
Why don't you do a rebuttal?
You know what my opinion?
Oh, the question is, do you have remarks to make to the rest of us?
Do you want to make a rebuttal?
A rebuttal
Speak your
to
piece.
what has been said before.
No, you cannot.
Okay.
Tonight.
Tell it to him.
All right, get,
Or,
okay, Brown, about
5 minutes.
3 minutes to 4 minutes each.
about 4 minutes each.
Okay,
After
It's crazy.
after 4 minutes, it's gonna be a hard,
After 4 minutes, you'll be asked to sit down.
that's right.
After 3 minutes.
You'll be given a 1 minute
Tim
warning.
will raise his hand. He is keeping time. All right, Neil, do you want to?
I want David to
be the first speaker.
Get up there.
First rebuttal.
Get up there.
All right. Okay. He'll rest.
Okay,
David's a Christian.
okay. Well, let's respect our speakers. Go ahead, Neil.
Alrighty. There's a joke that I heard that's attributed to Abraham Lincoln. The fancy ones are attributed to Oscar Wilde. The more earthy ones are usually attributed to Lincoln. And it's a riddle. If you call a horse's tail a leg, how many legs does a horse have? And the answer is it has 4. Calling a tail a leg doesn't make it one. Christianity is a Hellenistic, syncretistic religion with relatively little relationship to Judaism. I wondered why we started out with 20 minutes. We're not supposed to stereotype, but we had opened up with a video of 20 minutes of ignorant Southern rednecks who either have never read the Constitution or the Bible or never knew what they were reading. The word Moshiach means anointed, like getting oil poured on your head, which is the ritual by which a person is formally installed as a king. Christ also means king. Famously, first book of Samuel, chapter 8, God is my king. I don't have an earthly king. One of the reasons that Jesus had the success he did in his lifetime is that there were people who hoped and expected he would be the general who would throw out the Romans and be king. Just normal earthly king, the way any other king is. And the story of the trial of Jesus in the Gospels is fiction. In real life history, a Sanhedrin which declared one death penalty in 60 years was called the Bloody Sanhedrin. Under the Romans, the Sanhedrin had no power to give a death penalty. We've all seen crucifixes with the little sign on top, INRI, which is the abbreviation for Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. This is an announcement of the crime for which he was being executed. He was executed by the Romans. Pontius Pilate was a foul son of a bitch, and other foul son of a bitches thought he was extreme as a Roman governor. But Caesar is the only king. And Jesus was executed by the Romans on a charge of treason for allegedly claiming to be a king or a potential king. Our speaker mentioned something about the rabbis being in power. I don't know if he passed Hebrew school, but he flunked history. There have never been rabbis with formal secular power. Rabbi's a scholar, a teacher, a community resource. The temple was run by the priests. I've got 1 minute, so I'm going to start galloping. Dilution by converts. Christianity is a Hellenistic religion, which means it's a hodgepodge of parts from all over the place. There's a bunch of retrojection where they went carefully through the Bible, the Tanakh, and found bits here and there that they could claim showed their case, but it's relatively fabricated. That stuff from Isaiah, the prophets were threatening, not predicting, threatening the people around them. And the notion of a God-man is Greek. It's not Hebrew. Between the Maccabees revolt and the revolt of Bar Kokhba, Jews were at warfare against the Hellenes for 300 years. The Hellenistic God-man is antithetical to Judaism.
Next.
Good evening, I'm David Travis. This brought to my mind a joke I had heard, or a quip, that Groucho Marx had made. He said that Irving Berlin had a good friend who was hunchbacked, and they were walking down the street and they saw some Jewish klezmers, that's a Jewish musicians, and he said something to them in Jewish and in Yiddish, and they answered him back in Yiddish, and he turned to his hunchbacked friend and said, "You know, I used to be Jewish." And walked a little ways further, and the hunchback guy said, "You know, I used to be hunchbacked." So that's my Groucho quip here. The fact is that when Jesus was executed, about 3 days before he was executed, he was celebrating the Passover. Jesus had lived as a Jew all of his life, and I believe he was a man with a mission, and that his mission was to prevent the Jews from becoming extinct. I think that the entire thing got twisted around when after he was executed, it was a very small sect of people who kept his memory going for about 60 years or so, until that Saul, who later changed his name, it became Paul the Apostle, and he spread this whole thing, and he wrote the New Testament based on, he gathered stories about Jesus all over, everywhere he could, and then he put it together his way. The fact is, though, that when Jesus told the people to pray, he said, "Say, your Father who art in heaven." So he was telling the people that they were the sons of God as much as he was the Son of God. It was about 200 years before the birth of Jesus that the entire half the kingdom was conquered by Rome, and the entire populace of that half of the kingdom became fully assimilated. So when Jesus came on the scene, he was afraid that the same thing, now that the other half of the kingdom had fell, he was afraid the same thing was going to come about, and that there weren't going to be any more Jews. When he denounced the chief scribes and rabbis, he did so for the betrayal of the Jews. And that was about it. I'm going to cap this off simply by saying that Christianity was born in the Middle East. It was taken to Greece, where it became a philosophy. It was taken to Europe, to Rome, where it became a religion. It spread throughout Europe, where it became a culture, and then it was taken to America, where it became big business.
Next. Okay.
You know, our speaker has been rather kind to us Christians. I don't think the presentation of the super patriotic American evangelical, it assumed that these were evangelicals because they seem to be more or less southern or middle western, which often it amounts to the same thing because there were large migrations from the south to the north by white Southerners as well as black Southerners. Some couldn't compete with with slavery, and some tried to escape and successfully did escape from slavery. Slavery is a terrible thing, and if you see the present warfare between the Sunnis and Shia, neither of whom can be accused of being either Christian or Jewish, you can sympathize with the guardedness of both Jews and Christians about somebody who believes very differently from them and might come to be hostile. We are in times where things that are sacred are abused or misunderstood, and let's hope that we can get a better understanding. When it comes to the times of Jesus and the early church, the early church members were mostly Jewish at first, and in the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, the Jewish communities, which frequently assimilated and incorporated non-Jews into Judaism, at first were a little guarded about this supposed Messiah or belief in Jesus.
1 minute.
As they were guarded against any other messianic movement that might get them in trouble with the Roman state. And they well should be, because not everybody who calls himself a Messiah is acting for God, but very often out of personal ambitions or out of mixed motives, or with a poor conception of the military fortunes of the Jewish people at that time. So
your time.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
First, I'll start with a personal observation for myself and for our learned guest. First of all, for our guest, I would advise him to turn in the silver star of Christianity and reclaim the gold star of Judaism. Now, personally, I've met millions of, not millions, but thousands of people, and my best friends and all the people I read about and influenced my life are Jewish. So I think I might be Jewish myself. I may be Sephardic Jew. I don't know. Greek or Turkish Jew. But the thing is, after studying the Bible with no help from anybody, just sitting there a few hours, a few minutes a day. After 5, 6 years, I came to some conclusions. Now, I'm not still capable of doing intellectual gymnastics or theological acrobatics. That I'll have to plead ignorance. But I have made certain observations, and so I'll try to be brief. Some of them are here. Number one,
That's your tip.
Thank you, sir.
from a believer I became an agnostic, from an agnostic I became an atheist, and from an atheist I became an anti-theist, anti-God. Because reading the Bible I discovered that this is my enemy. I say, I gotta be a very dumb person to believe this is my Savior or my salvation. And then I came to the conclusion that the Old Testament is a geopolitical agenda disguised as a religion. And the New Testament is a sugar-coated poison fruit. Christianity, Judaism for dummies. That's what I call the New Testament, Judaism for dummies. So, our esteemed guest is a very brilliant man. He doesn't fall in that category. But the thing is, the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, and this I need help from this black gentleman in the white hat, because last time he spoke about the Greek philosophers, and I have not even read 5 pages of Plato or Aristotle. But from what I know, they elevated the human being to higher levels, and Christianity, Judeo-Christianity, degraded human beings. For me, for example, as a Gentile, I assume I'm a Gentile, he degraded me to a sheep and a fish. You know, he said to the apostles, you're going to be fishers of men. So we're fish. And you see that the feast, the fish symbol in some places.
1 minute.
And then the Greeks elevated us to higher and more quality human beings, and the Bible degraded us. And so I came to the final conclusion, and that is, again, this is not theological or intellectual, it's just plain common sense from insight into my own thinking after 75 years. I feel that we can exist without God, but God cannot exist without us. So the only time God exists is when I think about Him. Otherwise, He doesn't exist. In fact, the only guy that I believe exists is Santa Claus. Because every Christmas, he never failed to leave me a present under the Christmas tree. I never saw him, but I see that present under the Christmas tree, so I believe in Santa Claus. But I don't believe in God, the Virgin Mary, or Jesus Christ.
Next up, James. 4 minutes.
Not no a biblical scholar, no other kind of scholar. However, the gentleman over there said it take them 3 years to read the Old Testament. It taken me at least 2 or 3 years to read it. There's no dispute with this first speaker here. However, when I read the Old Testament, the Jews was upset with Jesus Christ for several reasons. And one of the main reasons was that he was telling people he was the Son of God. And he was the Messiah. They believed in a Messiah, but they didn't believe he was a Messiah. One of the best Jewish history books I read was a guy named Solomon Brissell. And I read another history book, and Solomon Brissell footnote was in this guy's book. So Solomon Brissell was a guy that I kind of enjoyed reading because this history was consistent with intelligence and some other books I read. And in his book, Jesus Christ was another crackpot to the Jews at the time. There was hundreds and hundreds of other people before Christ coming up talking shit that Christ was talking. So the Jews didn't like that. Now, I bring that up to get to Pontius Pilate. The Jews would, Pilate said, I want you to hang him. And so Pilate said, no, he broke y'all law. Y'all take care of him. and they kept on pushing Pontius Pilate, and like any other king or president, when the multitude said, I want you to do something, they will sacrifice other people in other times in order to maintain their position. I was in charge, I'd probably do the same thing myself to stay in power and control. So they killed Christ on the urgings of the Jews. That's what I got out of the Old Testament, not as a scholar, but somebody that read the book over 3 years. Now, St. Paul did write a lot about Jesus Christ after he died, but the people saying Christianity and all that, something else I read, that came almost 400 years later. It was people like Constantine, the emperor of Rome, that spreaded this. And Constantine was the one that got Paul, John, Matthew, blah, 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 to write the story about Jesus Christ. Now, back to the Greeks. Listen, I read the Old Testament, and I also read the classics, the Homers, the Hesiod, the Dantes, which came afterward, and Virgils and so forth and so on. I could swear when I read that, I said, shit, this comes right out of the Old Testament.
Oh, thanks very much.
In other words, plagiarism.
Thanks. Next.
Raj, are you next, or?
I am.
Or Tom? Oh,
I gave up my seat to this gentleman.
good job.
Okay.
Okay, well, you know, I'm Catholic by baptism, believer, and I just want to say that, you know, I was a reader in church, a lector, and I have to say that an earlier reading that you were doing from Isaiah, I think it was a suffering servant reading, and in Advent time, which is the time before Christmas, the 4 Sundays before Christmas, we always read from the prophets in the Old Testament, you know, where they validate, you know, Jesus as Savior, or His coming on Christmas Day. And incidentally, you know, Christmas Day is a fictitious birthday for Jesus. He was probably born in the spring, because that's the time of the year that the shepherds are out with their sheep and the lambs, giving birth to the lambs.
Right?
So, you know, it is artificially set as December 25th because it coincides with the date that the pagans in Rome celebrated the winter solstice, and so the Christians got to celebrate it, and it's been that way ever since. Some of the things, you know, one of the things that I think I want to emphasize is the focus on Jesus' purpose. You know, in the Catholic circles that I've been in learning, you know, studying the lecture part, is that Jesus is the Word of God made flesh. And I think if you read Scripture, all along the way, He's challenging the Jewish priests and scribes and Pharisees. You know, He's saying, He's doing miracles on the Sabbath, and they're saying you can't do that.
No.
And, you know, in a way He was saying, yes, I can. Then there was the case of the woman who was going to be stoned to death. And by Jewish law, she was supposed to be stoned for what she did. And Jesus, you know, challenges them by saying, you know, whoever is without sin cast the first stone. Of course, all of them realized they had sins in their lives, so they disappeared. And then Jesus turns to the woman and says, I condemn you, neither, go forth and sin no more, or whatever. And that was sort of like the first confession, I guess. But and the other thing too is, and it wasn't touched on here, and there's a portion in the Acts of the Apostles where Peter and Paul have a big discussion about if I think it's the Gentiles. Should the Gentiles be Jewish first, you know, converted to Judaism, and then become Christians? And Paul says no, they shouldn't. And I forget how it all goes, but it's in the Acts of the Apostles there. And so anyway, the other thing I want to mention about Barabbas Victor Mature did a very interesting movie in the role of Barabbas, and that was the title of the movie. And I think at the end, if you watch the movie, Barabbas converts to Christianity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Quickly, I meant to say that the Old Testament was stolen from the classics.
Okay, next.
Barabbas went out and pulled a bank job.
Okay, Bill.
About all I've been doing at the rebuttals the past few weeks and probably for the next few weeks is solicit email addresses to get a letter I wrote to Charles Koch on the difference between a free and a free in quotes market. And a lot of it is a debunking of the economics of Milton Friedman. I hope it's no relation, but well. Anyway, I hope it's, you market flagellators, at least you make a distinction between a free and a quote unquote free market. I mean, I flagellate the quote unquote free market quite a bit myself. A lot of same complaints you have, except I like to think I'm a little more precise about it. But anyway, as far as our subject tonight is concerned, I've thought for some time that maybe the Good Samaritan ought to be translated as the good nigger, because the Samaritans were the niggers of their time and place. And I could say a few other things, but I'll let it go for now.
All right. Raj.
Barabbas, the never. He was like me, my favorite cat.
I don't know a lot about your history and any religion's history. Last Sunday, I had a priest visiting us.
Thank you.
He was from, he manages 3 churches in a Munich, and he's a rising star in the Catholic Church. And he comes every year, and we devote 1 hour talking about what's going on. And we talked about his parish, what kind of people are there, what their children, how they are coming up, how the poor people are doing, and what kind of work they do. And then we talked about Pope, whether he's real or he's not on this liberal take on issues. We talk about his health because that is becoming an issue. And this guy has his rising star, he travels to Rome, he sees Pope, he had gone to India to Mother Teresa, and it was nice. I mean, we not a single minute we spend on a Jesus or any other issues. We just talk about the things which are really, and it was pleasure. It was very nice. You know, why people in the religion cannot be like that? Talk the everyday issue. Talk which unite you. You know, I did not try to convert him to Hinduism. He did not try to convert me to Catholicism. And it was great. You know, and we have a very happy, healthy friendship. And I thought gentleman was going to talk about that, how good a work they are doing, and how they are uniting people, and how they are, those people who have proclivity towards Christianity, is bringing them joy, and you know, and how they are helping their families, and how the people are confused, they are guiding them, and I thought that would have been nice. But going to theology is kind of, you know, you can prove that dog is a cat and cat is a dog. Thank you.
Okay. All right, next.
David Zucker.
I have seldom heard a talk that was more shot through with errors than what I heard tonight. Neil pointed out most of them. I would only add to what Neil said that the synagogue, as it developed, was not seen as a little temple. The cult of sacrifice, the temple cult ended when the temple was destroyed in Jerusalem, when Jerusalem was destroyed. Synagogues, when they started after that, were considered to be houses of study. And that's what they were used for, and even the worship services that were conducted in them then and now are intended as a means of study. All right. I'm sorry, now, I'm not an Orthodox Jew. I'm a Reformed Jew. But I am an observant one. I do go to synagogue. And I'm afraid on that score, however, the Orthodox Jews have it right. You cannot be a Jew and believe in Jesus, period.
That's right. Yay.
If you are going to believe in Jesus, then you are a Christian. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a Christian. Lots of people I know, including a great many friends of mine, belong to several different branches of Christianity. Some of them are even in here in this room. But having said that, if you say you believe in Jesus, you can't be a Jew and do that. And I have to be blunt. I consider Jews for Jesus to be a form of heresy. Now, this is the modern world. We don't stone heretics in this world, and we should not. Nor should we put them to death. This is, as I say, the modern world. Just as at the college we believe in one fool at a time. The Constitution, while it doesn't come quite out and say this, essentially gives every fool the right to shoot off his or her mouth. In turn, it gives other fools like me the right to tell them what we think of that. Though I'm not going to get into that here, there's not a necessity for it. I reserve the right to do that only when somebody who calls themselves Jews for Jesus tries to shove a leaflet in my face on the street. That's happened once or twice. It was made plain to them what I thought of them and their beliefs. And you certainly have a right to them. But having said that, I'm sorry, I think you're a heretic, plain and simple.
Oh.
And that isn't going to change. And to say that, to show us Jewish New Testaments that mention the Torah in there, well, that's kind of like what, I won't blame all Presbyterians for this, just a small group of them did a few years ago when they set up a fake temple with
1 minute.
With an ark in it and Torahs. They were trying to, yes, I see your finger, thank you, Tim. They were trying to convert some young teenage Jews to Protestant Christianity. This got dealt with in 60 minutes, and it was exposed for what it was. And I won't say that yours is akin to that. I think your beliefs are sincerely held. But having said that, I think they're still wrong. Thank you.
Okay, Charlie, 4 minutes and 4 minutes only.
All right, let's thank our speaker. He's taking a tough crowd there. Thank you very much. I'll be very quick. No personal attacks, and I apologize. And that's coming from the atheist. Right? The atheist has better ethics than you guys. The devil worshiper. The Judeo-Christian religions have a certain continuity. It makes absolute and perfect sense. To blend them, which is possibly theologically overdue. Every religion establishes a dogma. And you can sit and dispute one dogma versus another, and the accuracy of this and the inaccuracy of that one if it brings some definition to your life, and hopefully, somehow, I don't know how, gives you some ethical guidance, please go ahead. You know, that's kind of cool. There's an ecumenical thing. I was involved in the world parliamentary religions. You're naive enough to think that we could bring all the world religions together.
Thank you.
And they could put this stuff aside. And even I, even though I'm not in the religious community, participated in that. But what happened was, I like to study. Actually, when coming down here today and preparing for this, I got really studying some intellectual history. And your religions went on, Judeo-Christian, Muslims come along and things like this. But what happened was, historically, you had guys like Erasmus and Bacon and things like that. The result of which was something called the Enlightenment. And out of that Enlightenment became concepts such as human rights and some realistic, ethical things, the categorical imperatives. Unfortunately, our nation was based on the ideas that came out of that Enlightenment. We saw earlier this thing, well, this is the Christian nation or not. That's absolutely nonsense. We're a nation based on the Enlightenment. And even those wild, secular, atheistic philosophers of France had more influence than either of the Judeo-Christian traditions. But anyhow, that's pretty cool. I think if you guys want to get along, I certainly would encourage it. I mean, there's some people getting together.
1 minute, Charlie.
And realizing, I don't have anything more to say than other. You sparked my interest in Barabbas. I think I'm going to look into that guy. That's the figure of the Bible that has most inspired my life. You know, thanks a lot. I thought it was pretty good, you know. Yeah.
All right, let me make a quick minute rebuttal.
I mean, you guys can argue this. Only 1 minute. As long as you're not those crazy Adventists, that's what I wanted to ask.
Who was keeping the time?
Floating up to heaven and all that. Now they're crazy.
The funny thing is, it's amazing how much we overcomplicate things. The message of Jesus Christ is rather simple. We are all sinners under God. He sent His Son down to save us from our sins and to send us to heaven. We have a choice of whether to accept Him or reject Him. Basically, that's what the whole Christian message is about.
All right.
The only thing I would like to say is that we have heard here criticism. And I believe, and do we not, all have the right for individual belief and respect somebody's belief, particularly something as really minute as who somebody calls his personal God. That's nobody's business, and we must accept each other for who we are.
Okay. Speaker gets the last word.
I don't respect. I'm not a singer. I was born in love.
Hey. Well, as I said when I first got up here, I really appreciate the opportunity to present before you my mirror reflections. I tried to open with an analogy of a sort to explain where I was coming from, and I just really, again, appreciate the opportunity that I had to present to you guys, and I really appreciate the feedback and some of the rebuttal comments that were rather insightful. And as our last speaker just said, we do all have our own views, and some are similar, some are very different, but it's a great gathering you guys have. My first time here, and I think it won't be my last. Yes, I think I'll have to return. It was really a lot of fun, and thank you for the meal, and all the intellectual curiosity and engagement. I love learning, always have, always will. So really appreciate having met you guys tonight in this way. Hope to do it again sometime.
And now here's Chicago's true religion.
I hope you all come back, and I hope that
That's Chicago's true religion.
they have learned something from the discussion. It's always possible, you know. All right. And if you haven't learned something from the discussion, you'll possibly learn it elsewhere. So.
David did not pick on that.